Dwarfs got a big old bag of money.
The Angels lose Mike Trout for the season.
A source is proposing that ESPN wants Washington State and Oregon State in the Big 12.
It's official. USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington are now official members of the 18-team Big Ten Conference.
The Locked On Podcast Network presents the Big 6 in 60. The 6 biggest national sports stories from the local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Get the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 60 minutes. The Big 6 in 60 starts now with the biggest story in sports. You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast.
We did get to see a very strong connection right away between quarterback Brett Rypien, the Bears' third-string quarterback, and the backup wide receiver Colin Johnson. Now, maybe the casual Chicago Bears fan might not have known a lot about either of those players or maybe even heard any of those names before, but Johnson was a guy who was on the practice squad a lot last season, a big-bodied wide receiver that we saw use that big body effectively in this game. And then Brett Rypien is the number 3 quarterback behind Tyson Bagent. Bagent only really playing the first drive or so in this game. And Rypien really looked like one of the better number 3 quarterbacks in the NFL. It looked like he was better than the quality of players he was playing against in this game. It's a preseason game, so we're never going to read too much into it, but it raises an eyebrow when he goes 11 of 15 for 166 yards and 3 touchdowns. Pretty close to, but not quite a perfect passer rating. 73% completion in there. Of course, no interceptions, no turnovers in that performance as well. And 3 of those completions went to Colin Johnson for 56 yards and 2 touchdowns. So a very clear connection between wide receiver and quarterback. But I think the most interesting thing about that connection is that after the game, Brett Rypien said at training camp practices, he thought he threw one pass to Colin Johnson throughout practices. The only time in training camp where Rypien has been the quarterback on the field and Johnson has been the receiver on the field. It happened to be kind of a deeper back shoulder throw like we saw Johnson make a few of in this game, but it's not like that's something they had been able to drill over and over and over again throughout these training camp practices. This was kind of a newer connection, or a newer pairing at least, of these two guys on the field at the same time, throwing with each other at the same time here. And that's kind of what makes the preseason cool, right? When you can see guys step in and make plays like this. Certainly for Rypien, it gives you a heightened level of confidence in him as the number 3 quarterback, certainly compared to what the Bears had last season in Nathan Peterman, who even in the preseason didn't really show you a ton to be super excited about. And then obviously prior to that in his NFL career had shown you plenty to be concerned about. Rypien, on the other hand, has played, a handful of games in his NFL career across multiple teams, has always been a journeyman number 3 quarterback type. But for him to come into this game and play well really goes a long way into solidifying some of that confidence in what the Bears have behind Caleb Williams. There shouldn't be any scenario in which Rypien takes the field in a regular season game this year. I don't think he's going to come in and necessarily unseat Tyson Bagent just yet as the number 2 quarterback. There's a reason they only asked Bagent to play 1-ish drives, attempted 2 for 3 for 16 yards, because I think they're pretty darn confident in what Tyson Bagent can do. And after that first drive, he and the other, starters, or the starters for this game, the second string players for this game, came out and never really came back in. There were a handful of players that were out there initially for the first drive or so, and then beyond that, I don't know if it was 1 drive or 2. I wasn't counting the exact numbers of plays, but it looked to me like they were able to come out after that first drive. I believe it was the second drive. Brett Rypien came in the game. The running back rotation changed. The offensive line changed slightly. The wide receivers changed slightly, but I think Bagent just played that one opening drive. That's a pretty strong ringing endorsement of him as their number 2 quarterback, but maybe Rypien's performance in this game can start to open that door a little bit more and make that more of an open competition than I think it was up to this point. For Colin Johnson at wide receiver, on the other hand, there's still room for him to push the wide receiver position here. Obviously, we know DJ Moore, number 1, Keenan Allen, number 2, Rome Odunze, number 3, or in whatever order you want to put them. That's pretty well locked in. We think of Tyler Scott as number 4, given that he was a 4th-round pick last year and has shown some flashes and has been one of the, better players at training camp so far that we've heard of. And then there's a real spot here for Colin Johnson to try and be wide receiver 5 or even push for wide receiver 4. He was the next wide receiver in the game after Tyler Scott. The starting wide receivers on the field were Scott on one side and Colin Johnson on the other. DeAndre Carter came in as the slot receiver, the number 3 receiver in 3 receiver sets. But in this game, the first offense to take the field was Scott, Johnson, and Carter. That would put Tyler Scott ahead of a lot of the other wide receivers on this depth chart. When you think about guys that are in this mix for the 5th wide receiver spot, Velus Jones, Dante Pettis, Freddie Swain, some other undrafted players like Simba Webster, Peter LeBlanc, John Jackson, etc. Like, there's a lot of wide receivers competing for just a couple of spots here. And Colin Johnson not only got the first crack at it with Tyler Scott, but also clearly made the most out of it. So I'm not ready to put him on the 53-man roster. And if there was a way to bet money on this, it's not on FanDuel Sportsbook, I would bet on him making the practice squad and not making the 53-man roster. But he certainly had the best possible start you could hope for or expect from a former undrafted free agent wide receiver trying to make a name for himself. And we're still left with some questions about some of the other wide receivers on this group.
Houston Texans, they started their preseason schedule with a 21-17 loss to the Chicago Bears. Unfortunately, we would not know if they had a chance to come back in the 4th quarter due to rain. Ended the game midway through the 3rd quarter. However, Sarge, I do believe that we saw enough during the first 3 quarters to come away with some good and bad. Most of the good came on the offensive side of the ball, and that's why I definitely want us to start with our takeaways from this game.
Cody, I cannot believe that Mother Nature robbed us of watching Tim Boyle in the 4th quarter.
I know,
Like,
aren't you
that was
so
gonna
sad?
be his quarter. That was going to be his quarter. Like, he was going to be like, all right, Tim, put it together, guy. You're going to do it. Like, Mother Nature robbed us of seeing Tim Boyle on his comeback. He was going to get D'Amico would have walked into the locker room. Was like, this game ball right here is for you, guy. I'm pretty sure that's how he played it out in his head. That's what he's saying. He's like, y'all better be glad. He told the Bears walking out the field, y'all better be glad it's the rain. But Cody, speaking about the offensive side of the ball, I was very, very impressed by the fact that D'Amico Ryans and Bobby Slowick started Juice Scruggs at center and Kenyon Green at left guard. Those are 2 players who are going to probably be take a lot of first team reps, who will be starters once the regular season starts, to go along with Laramie Tunsil, Titus Howard, and Shaq Mason. Those 3 players did not play on Thursday night, and so it was good. I like getting Kenyon back reacclimated to NFL game speed. It was good to see Juice Scruggs going into his 2nd year next to Kenyon. And the one thing that I really liked about that center guard combination is you could see the camaraderie that they built up. We've talked about this before, how those 2 worked out this summer intentionally. Juice Scruggs stayed in Houston intentionally to work out with Kenyon Green to get that type of camaraderie. And you could tell every time they really needed a big play, or when Davis Mills was really looking for protection, he made sure that he stood behind Juice Scruggs and Kenyon Green. There was a time when I think it was 4th and inches. They ran the ball right behind those 2. And, why not? You want to make sure that those guys, those 2 starters, are getting the reps and getting themselves acclimated, like I said, once again, for Kenyon Green to game speed. So I was very, very, very impressed by Juice Scruggs and Kenyon Green.
I'm glad that you talked about the offensive line, because the one thing that I love most about this first preseason game is the fact that, at least on the offensive side of the ball, a lot of the players that we talked about throughout the first 10 days of training camp was basically shown in this game. You talked a lot about Kenyon Green. Sarge, really quick, everything that you saw and talked about Green, I believe it was a week ago, you saw it come to light in this game, correct?
Yes, and he's healthy. I'm glad to
Exactly.
see that he's healthy. And one, if I can add one caveat to that, what he also was so during practice a lot we see, because Blake Fisher, the rookie tackle, Blake Fisher has to go up against either Will Anderson Jr. or Danielle Hunter. We've talked about that before, and sometimes Kenyon has to help him out. He has to help him out sometimes, making sure that his responsibility is done, but to also make sure that he's helping out Blake Fisher to protect CJ Stroud. I think that trial by fire that Blake Fisher has been going through, and on tonight, we were able to see him just stick to his responsibility, and Blake Fisher hold his own because of who he's going up against and who's gone up against in these first 10 training camp practices. So that's the one thing that I'm glad I got a chance to focus on tonight, was to see Kenyon himself just be able to play guard without doing anything else.
And I'm glad that you mentioned that about Blake Fisher, because a couple days ago on this show, me and John was talking, and I said one of the things that I wanted to see in this first preseason game was to see whether or not all of those tough reps that Blake Fisher is getting in practice right now with Danielle Hunter, with Will Anderson Jr., how much he's going to benefit from that. Remember, I asked Coach D'Amico Ryans about that a couple days ago, and that's basically what we saw in this very first game. One of my biggest takeaways, and I've been talking about this a lot ever since the start of training camp, was how competitive this running back group is. And once again, we already know who the top two guys are going to be. But once you start looking at who's going to be the quote-unquote third running back, when you look at Darrell Gumbawale, you look at guys like British Brooks, J.J. Taylor, Gerard Jordan, all of those guys made a name for themselves throughout training camp. In this very first game, just about all of those guys still made a name for themselves in this very first preseason game. I mean, you take a look at what J.J. Taylor and Darrell Gumbawale were able to do. They were in this limited time, they was out there on the field, a combined 9 rushes for 30 yards. J.J. Taylor had one of the biggest, longest runs for the Houston Texans, running between the B and the A gap. And who is in the B and the A gap? Kenyon Green and Juice Scruggs, for a game, I believe it was 10 or 12 yards. But this game showcased everything that I've been saying about that offensive backfield. And not only are the guys that I've been talking about, Cam Akers went out there and made a name for himself as well. And Sarge, I don't know about you, but I'm looking at Cam Akers. First and foremost, we know he was a late addition to training camp. Then his first couple of days of camp, he really wasn't out there outside of individual team drills. So going into this game, I wasn't expecting much from Cam Akers. And secondly, look, first and foremost, like I said a couple of days ago, we talked about his addition. I don't care if he makes this team or not. Kudos to him for coming off not one, but 2 Achilles injury and still trying to keep his career up. That alone is a testament within itself. But for him to go out there, showcase what he can do, look, 5 carries, 13 yards, and a reception touchdown, it says a lot about what Coach D'Amico Ryans said when he was asked, why did you add Cam Akers to this team? And he said, we just want to see if he's going to come out here and compete. Like I mentioned, he's been quiet at the start of training camp, but after this game right here, I'm pretty sure Coach D'Amico Ryans and Nick Caserio thinking to themselves, look, it's still a long shot if he makes the 53-man roster. It's still a long shot if he makes the practice squad roster, but he's definitely going to put some heat on these other guys in a position group that has looked damn good. Speaking of putting some heat, Sarge, listeners and viewers, when the Houston Texans landed Ben Skoranek, I didn't know what to expect from him. I thought, if anything, special teams guy, and if he wasn't a special teams guy, a practice squad guy. But Sarge, watching him over the last couple of days of training camp and watching him go out perform Thursday night against the Chicago Bears, I'm thinking to myself, that young man is about to shake up this wide receiving unit. And if he doesn't shake up the wide receiving unit, I think he might have an opportunity to shake up the fullback unit as well.
Cody, we're talking about the Houston Texans wide receiver room, not the Houston Cougars.
I know.
Skoranek is not going to shake up anything except protein shakes that he's going to be bringing to Nico, Tank,
When I say shake up, I'm talking about putting heat on the rest of those guys who are on the bubble.
No football, no NBA, no problem with FanDuel. We got baseball. WNBA is going to be back before you know it. The Olympics are here. Plenty to dive into over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. The MVP award in the American League may already be decided, and there's still 2 more months to play. FanDuel is giving you Aaron Judge or the field. The odds for Aaron Judge to win the AL MVP, -1,000. That's a lot. 10-1. The odds are anyone else at +660. All rise. So what are you waiting for? Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode.
Werf's got a big old bag of money.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The big news that everyone has been waiting for, and that is the contract extension for Tristan Wirfs officially being done. It was announced Thursday morning the Buccaneers and Wirfs agreed to a 5-year, $140.63 million deal, making him the highest paid lineman in NFL history and the highest paid player in Buccaneers history. This deal ensures that Wirfs will be with the team for the next 6 years. And over the course of those 6 years, he will make $158.869 million. There were some conflicting reports as recently as Sunday where there were those saying that the deal was getting close. There were others saying that it was miles apart. Turned out to be the former, and we kind of knew that based on what Jason Light and Tristan Wirfs had each said. But Evan, Jason Light said that if they were able to bring back Baker and Mike and Levante and Antoine and Tristan, that there was going to be another boat parade. So when's that going to be?
I don't know, but Jason Light owes us a boat parade. That's all I know. He said if anyone's got a boat, let him know. There are many in the Tampa Bay area that have a boat. So, I believe that he's going to have to hit up Tristan for who's going to cover the beer for everybody. But, yeah, hopefully it's in February of next year, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, they should do the celebratory boat parade for this, and then, that kind of gives them a rehearsal.
Correct.
In February. I mean, that's how that works, right?
They should do it during the bye week. You're right.
Yeah, I don't know. The bye week may be coming off of a little bit of a rough stretch, but Tristan, we knew he was going to be up there, right? We knew it was going to be one of the top offensive lineman contracts in the NFL. Is there a player really in the NFL? I know Jason Light kind of said it, but is there a player more deserving of this level of money than Tristan Wirfs, especially being a non-quarterback? And those guys are getting stupid, ridiculous money anyway because they're quarterbacks. But I mean, this was really a long time coming, and in my opinion, very well deserved.
Look, offensive linemen, they do not grow on trees. And, we thought that the Buccaneers had something cooking coming out of 2020, right? With Marpet and Jensen, and Wirfs just got there. And Donovan Smith had his best season. And naturally over time, Marpet retires unexpectedly. Jensen has a career-ending injury. You lose a couple of guys to free agency, and you have to rebuild the whole thing again. But Tristan is one of those guys who is on a trajectory of having a bust there in Canton, and he's 25 years old. He's already earned 2 All-Pro selections. He's been to 3 Pro Bowls. He has a Super Bowl ring to his name. He just earned a captaincy last season from his teammates. He's a guy who, even with all the negotiating that was going on where you have guys like Jordan Love who didn't practice, CeeDee Lamb who isn't with the team, Jamar Chase isn't practicing, that Wirfs still felt it was necessary to be out there and do whatever he could and essentially pulled himself out of 11-on-11 stuff. But he is just not in his nature to not be with the guys. He was there all off season training, even though he wasn't part of OTAs. During his press conference, he said he was the SpongeBob meme looking outside the window where they're all having fun outside and he's just on the inside. But that he is just a good dude. Beyond being arguably the best left tackle in the game, certainly a top 3 guy, but this is money well spent. And the fact that the Bucs got a 5th year is really a huge win, because this is a guy, there aren't many of them, but when you have a 25-year-old left tackle who's built like him, you're willing to put down as many years as possible on that, because you just know that you ain't going in a different direction. Let me lock this in and let's move accordingly into the future. And now the Buccaneers are pretty much set up until 2026. This is like a 2-year window of we are all gas, no brakes. And you look into next year, you got to worry about guys like Chris Godwin, Levante again, who's under the Rondé Barber treatment, and Joe Tryanchenko, Anthony Nelson, Greg Gaines. It's going to be a much different type of offseason next year, and what this team can do also with probably more money in the bank.
Yeah, well, and it's perfect that you brought that up, because I had noted, I think now the attention kind of shifts to Chris Godwin, and you mentioned some of the names that I had listed, but then I'll throw out a couple of others. Sua Opeta, who just suffered a season-ending ACL injury. We don't know what that could have been, but if Ben Bredeson works out, he is only on a 1-year deal. You have Chase Edmonds that could be a free agent, Sterling Shepard, KJ Britt. These are on top of the guys that you've already mentioned. These are all potentially really important players for this Buccaneers team, and they're all set to hit free agency next year. So I think now at least the fan attention, everybody's been kind of enthralled by the Tristan Wirfs saga. I think a lot of the attention is going to turn to Chris Godwin and whether or not Jason Light can work a deal out with him. There really hasn't been much talk about, a potential deal from either side, and who knows what Godwin's intentions are, if he wants to stay or if he wants to hit free agency and test that market and see what he can get elsewhere. But, you mentioned kind of a 2-year all gas, no brakes window. Godwin's a pretty important part of that window, and you'd have to think that Jason's going to do as much as he can in order to get him to come back.
You would think, look, Mike Evans was just in this position last year, right? This is a totally new offense, and let's see how all the pieces work out. Now, if you think back to the Rams in 2021 when they won it all, they had pieces like Cooper Kupp, Odell Beckham Jr., Robert Woods, Tyler Higbee was their tight end still. I'm missing one other receiving option. Van Jefferson had his best season in the league that year. But since then, they've kind of, trimmed it down, right? It's really become Kupp, Puka Nacua. Higbee's hurt right now, but the offense is operating under a quality versus quantity. So I say that in a sense of, if we're trying to judge, we don't know anything about Liam Cohen at this moment, and that's why we got to figure out the offense. But if they're able to take some of the funds from Chris, what they would pay him, and put them into some other peripheral pieces, that might be the decision that's best for the team. But I know that Jason would love to keep Chris. I know that Chris would love to be in town. So there's a mutual interest there. And if they can find a compromise, they will. But, Chris has to prove it. Not so much in the yards Like, he's always produced. This dude has always produced. It's more so like, can you find the end zone? That's really what it's going to come down to for him. But yeah, as much as there are, like, you know, Chris Levante, the Anthony, JTS, KJ, like, as much as those guys are important pieces, to have like the core figured out is really a huge deal going into next year, because you're not trying to like make over your whole team. And not to mention, by the way, you get a whole draft again, which I would assume they're going to invest in another guard. They're going to go right back to the offensive line. They'll probably get another linebacker, and those will be kind of two voids filled within the draft. And then you can use some money to get the other pieces who help. There's a lot of evaluating that now has to be done. So, in my opinion, whatever funds they have next year should be going to an outside linebacker, an edge, something along those regards. If you listen to me on Locked On Bucks, you know I've been hammering that for like a year and a half now, and I still bang that drum.
The Angels lose Mike Trout for the season.
You are Locked On Angels Postcast, part of Locked On Sports Los Angeles.
Mike Trout has not played 122 games in a season since 2019. Since 2019. He has now missed more games than he's played in the last 4 years, which is brutal, absolutely brutal. And I'm going to quickly pull up the biggest stat of them all right here. In the second half of the season, meaning after the All-Star break, he's played this many games in the last 4 years. 0, 40, 1, and 0. So not only does he not play, not only is he always hurt, but, and certainly the Angels have not been in crazy playoff pushes, but when they did have Ohtani, when they did occasionally have Rendon actually play baseball and not sit in the dugout all game and make horrible quotes about not caring about baseball, Mike Trout has played 41 games combined in the second half of the season in the last 4 years. And I have been on the record, you can watch previous podcasts, of saying I think some of the commentary about Mike Trout is not fair. Talk about him not caring about the team, about him not prioritizing winning and prioritizing his stats and whatnot. I don't think that is fair. Like I've said, and I'll say it again, unless you are the most gifted athlete on planet Earth, there is no way that you win 3 MVPs and are one of the greatest players of your era without giving absolutely everything you have to the game of baseball. The argument can be made that he's given everything a little too much. Maybe he's gotten a little too strong, a little too bulky for an outfielder who tries to make diving catches, who tries to still be elite on the bases, who tries to make phenomenal plays, who tries to use his athleticism. Maybe he's gotten a little too strong up top. Maybe the shoulders are a little too wide. But once again, that is not a criticism of his effort, of his attention to detail, of his passion for baseball and for these Angels, who, by the way, these Angels have given him nothing. Let's be honest here. Sure, the last 4 years will absolutely hurt his legacy within our Angels community and overall, nationally, historically. Now there's questions. I'm reading headlines saying, is Mike Trout still a Hall of Famer? Sure, first ballot? Unanimous? When you suddenly don't play baseball for the last 4 years? Of course, this will taint his legacy. But one thing it should not taint is his, the legacy of his character, of his passion. He is not taking things easy in terms of caring about this team that, once again, has given him nothing. Because let's not forget, before these 4 years, Mike Trout won 3 MVPs and did not play a playoff game. All right? So I still do not appreciate, and I'm not being a homer, I'm not being defensive, I'm being unbiased. I don't love some of the conversations about Mike Trout. Now, if you want to talk about, like I said, him probably being a little too bulky up top, and not in an overweight way, because like I said, he gives everything to baseball, but in a maybe too muscular and strong way. Maybe the knees can't handle it. I will certainly criticize that. The latest talk has been this year about how he's not waiting until he's 90% to come back. He's maybe not taking the fastest recovery option, getting the quickest surgery or blah, 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 blah. There's a conversation that can be had about that. But even then, look what happens. He took arguably the most conservative route you could take with this meniscus injury. taking multiple weeks longer than the average person takes to come back. And he still re-injures it. And we don't know all the details. I don't know. Maybe we do. Honestly, I don't know what's come out in the last couple of hours. I was watching the game. But what I do know in the moment, earlier in the day when it was announced, is that this was not, at least what they're trying to say, is that this was not, a bad previous operation. It was not mishandled. It was just a coincidence. It's just bad luck that the same injury that just kept him out happened to be re-torn again. We'll never know. And based on the history of this franchise, based on the history of repetitive underfunding for the medical staff, underperformance from the medical staff, Anthony Rendon is a different story. I don't think the guy cares about baseball as much as Mike Trout. But it's not just Mike Trout. It's Ohtani. You can go down the list of all the guys that have been hurt for the Angels in recent years. And you have to make, correlation does not equal causation. Or maybe it's the other way around. I'm out of it. But the moral of the story is you can't know for sure, but this medical team, this franchise above all else, because I'm not going to blame it on one doctor, I'm going to blame it on the guy up top, Artie Moreno, has continuously failed this team, continuously failed players. Injuries have always lasted longer for us than other teams. People have always gotten injured more frequently than other teams. And Mike Trout is the greatest example, and he is not totally in the right. Like I said, there is certainly debates that can be had about if the decisions he's made about his body have helped him in the long run. Clearly they haven't if you've missed all those games. But this is just a summary of the Angels' experience. Your best player, your best character, the guy who's given everything for your franchise suddenly can't give your franchise anything. And it's just more proof, more evidence that, boy, did we fumble this trade deadline. You should have committed to the future and not the future being 2025, because the problem is the Angels historically have always thought that the future means the next year. No. When you have half your lineup, there's literally two guys in the Angels lineup right now hitting below 170. We literally have relievers starting. We have guys in Hans Kraus that were our saviors, but only because we had never heard of them before this season. Our best players have been like, other than Logan O'Hoppe, Kevin Pillar. Willie Calhoun at one point was like the second best hitter on the team. And you're telling me this roster is maybe a year away from competing? Give me a break. And so the good news is that Mike Trout, he'll be back in 2025. And of course, it's not like this year matters in terms of wins and losses. You're about as low in the standings as you can be. But it's just more reason that it makes no sense that more players were not traded at the deadline. Because as much as we expect Mike Trout to come back, and as much as we hope he actually plays half the year, I'm not even asking for the whole year. I'm asking for half the year at this point. Even with that, he's still a rusty Mike Trout coming off another season-long injury with a roster that is going to finish maybe with 100 losses. This team is not doing anything in 2025. I'm sorry. I hate to break it. This team is not a player away. We kept, people in certain circles were trying to say that we were Mike Trout coming back away. No, we are a whole lot away from competing anytime soon. And boy, does this day show it in so many regards. Not only the Trout injury, but the loss, the collapse, the mismanagement, certain guys pitching that shouldn't even be pitching in certain moments. This is brutal.
Game Time makes getting to the ballpark even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section or row for less, section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the free app, and new users can get $20 off their first purchase with code Locked On. Terms apply. That's code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, the lowest price guaranteed.
A source is proposing that ESPN wants Washington State and Oregon State in the Big 12.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Washington State and Oregon State to the Big 12 is something that I've been on for the last 8 months. And for a lot of people, it was, maybe it's going to happen, maybe it's not. For me, I really was pushing for it about a year ago, and then it went dormant. But now it's back. And this comes from at MHVER3 on Twitter. And I know what you're going, okay, who's that guy? Well, with 32,000 followers in a pinned tweet from April 18th, 2022. This is what I'll give you. He says, in 2022, April 18th, Fox Sports advising the Big Ten to expand, and USC and UCLA are the prime candidates being eyed. How Big Ten will they go? So this is a guy that I can't take you can't take everything the faceless, nameless Twitter account says at face value. But in 2022, being the first one on the front of USC and UCLA, I'll at least give his thoughts a gander. The idea here is that the Big 12, Washington State and Oregon State, will soon have a partnership, those two schools coming into the conference. He says something is up with ESPN. Eastern expansion is still top priority for the Big 12. That has to wait, though. Not sure where the sudden ESPN pressure is coming from to add Pac-2, but it has Big 12 offices in a frenzy currently. How big is too big? If we go to 18 now, how many ACC leftovers will we get? He goes on to say, my contact is saying a straw poll is currently being conducted to see how much support there is for adding Pac-2. So the straw poll is not something new. This is almost an under the table. Hey, let's ask each university, their respective athletic directors, their presidents, how would you feel about adding X, Y, and Z into the conference? Now, if the straw poll, everybody votes no, it doesn't mean that the schools cannot be added. At the end of the day, if ESPN says those two universities need to be in your conference, the Big 12 has to do it. That's where most of the revenue stream comes from, is their TV deal. If the university presidents, university athletic directors, universities themselves, board of regents don't want it, it's not going to matter altogether through a straw poll. However, according to this source, West Virginia's a no. And not only West Virginia, Cincinnati, UCF, Oklahoma State, and Kansas. So at least 5 of those schools that voted, according to this source, do not want those two added. He goes on to say, though, none of those 5 are a hard no. From this point, what most people in the Big 12 are likely waiting for via the straw poll is to figure out the logistics from a money standpoint. This isn't we don't want to travel that far. That's not how this works. UCF and West Virginia saying no might be related to them being on the West Coast, but for most of these schools, they understand this is where expansion is going. We're going to have coast-to-coast Big 12 action. We already have Utah and Arizona, UCF, West Virginia, Cincinnati. It is across the country, and that's not an issue because the Big Ten's the exact same. The only conference not subscribing to that right now is the SEC, and they're the most powerful conference in college football. And if the Big 12's not creative, they won't catch up. The Big 12 can't put all of its universities in one region of the country and expect to succeed based on the trajectory of the conference right now. So going coast to coast is not a bad thing, and I don't believe that the note here of those are soft no's is wrong. It's very likely that the 5 out of the 16 schools, by the way, that 5 would be completely out in a strong no. It's very unlikely that they would put their foot down. He says, more information needed, board meeting informally to discuss with consultants. He also says, ESPN has to pay less to add Pac-2 to the Big 12 versus adding to the ACC. And here's where you get the nitty-gritty of this. ACC currently shopping for more additions, anticipating multiple defections, and needing to stay at 14 to keep ESPN deal from getting restructured. But ESPN has the option to jettison the ACC deal in 2027 if they so choose. And we've been told they are most likely doing just that. Also hearing the ugly L word, that likely being lawsuit. ESPN has no reason, little to no reason, to pick up the contract of the ACC and make it viable past 2027. They have to decide in February of 2025 what they're going to do long-term with that contract for the next 8, 9, 10 years. And if Florida State and Clemson are not there, the ACC is not going to get paid what so many people think they could get paid to eclipse the Big 12. That is not a thing. The ACC is not taking Big 12 schools. The Big 12 instead is going to shop its options via ESPN's leadership being money. That's a fancy word for money here, and go where that money takes them. Guaranteed. That's what this conference wants to do, is stay alive, and money is going to be the way to do that. So the Big 12 will sit The Big 12 will sit and wait for ESPN to delegate this out, and those straw polls will amount to a hill of beans if ESPN says go do this.
No football, no NBA, no problem with FanDuel. We got baseball. WNBA is going to be back before you know it. The Olympics are here. Plenty to dive into over at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. The MVP award in the American League may already be decided, and there's still 2 more months to play. FanDuel is giving you Aaron Judge or the field. The odds for Aaron Judge to win the AL MVP, -1,000. That's a lot. 10-1. The odds are anyone else at +660. All rise. So what are you waiting for? Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode.
It's official. USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington are now official members of the 18-team Big Ten Conference.
You are Locked On Big Ten, your daily podcast on the Big Ten Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So, Oregon, Washington, USC, UCLA, again, welcome aboard. Can't say it enough. We'll have the latest news. By the way, have you seen the Oregon Duck popping around all the campuses around the conference? Plus, we'll have our pigskin picks. Games start in like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, but some of the lines are moving. We'll explain all of that. But the Big Ten was already a great conference, right? And sure, fans down in the South and Southeast would probably argue that their little conference is the best. But the Big Ten is no longer going to rely on its reputation of rivalries between Michigan and Ohio State or a football program like Penn State that wins 10 games a year. Let's not forget basketball with the likes of Purdue, Illinois, or Michigan State, just to name a few. Now effective today, we had Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA. And in football, I mean, if you want to call our second good tier teams, that Nebraska, Iowa, Wisconsin, just to name a few more. Look, in all sports, there are no days off in this conference. Every week is a gauntlet through the schedule. Now, certainly there are going to be ebbs and flows with every program. Well, most programs, some stay good all the time. But right now, let's take a look at the 4 new programs, football-wise, that are coming in here. Dan Lanning, of course, and the Oregon Ducks are coming in hot right now, really hot. Lanning enters his 3rd season. He's 22-5 overall, went 12-2 last year. Both losses, of course, were close losses to Washington, which made it to the national championship. Comes from the Georgia coaching tree. Won a lot of games there, knows how to win football. He talks about the art of war and releasing untapped potential all the time. Now, I don't think there's going to be an adjustment honeymoon period. They're going to come out swinging. They're coming. I think they're coming to the Big Ten with their sights on winning the Big Ten championship in year 1. They're looking at getting at one of those 12 college football playoff spots, and they're looking at winning the whole thing. They're ready. That's their mindset, and deservedly so. So, I mean, what a statement would that be to come into the Big Ten and win it in the first year? Hello, everybody. We're here. It's possible. It is possible. There's no question. Lanning and the Ducks enter the season with a young but talented Heisman hopeful at quarterback in Dylan Gabriel. In fact, Lanning tried to recruit Gabriel back when he was at Georgia. And one of his weapons will be Terrence Ferguson. And on defense, his team has 11 blue chip players on their front 7. They're coming. They're coming. Linebacker Jeff Bosa, he's a coach on the field. His team is ready on both sides of the football, ready to go. A lot of Pac-12 teams have reputations of quarterbacks and throwing the ball on offense and not much defense, but not the case with Oregon. They are good on both sides of the ball. They're really good on both sides of the ball. Meanwhile, some of the other teams, let's look at Washington. Jed Fish taking over a team whose last game was in the national championship against Michigan. But now 20 of the 22 starters are brand new. New starters across the lineup. They've got a new team. They're changing conferences, got a new coach. 28 new transfers are joining the Huskies program. A lot of recruits coming in as well. Fish bringing with him his running back, Jonah Coleman from Arizona. He had the highest yards per carry average in the country there last year. So expect him to be utilized a lot. That'll fit in well in the Big Ten. Nice running game. We like that in the Big Ten. Fish also brought with him 21 staff members from Arizona. So communication and figuring out everybody's job and what they're supposed to do, that's all going to be streamlined and simplified because this group has worked together before. By the way, in case you don't know, and many of you do, he's got a couple of interesting assistants on his staff. Pete Carroll's son, Brennan Carroll. He's the Huskies offensive coordinator and offensive line coach. And, of course, Bill Belichick's son, Steven, is the defensive coordinator. Both Pete Carroll and Bill Belichick have been around a little bit, around the program, watch them practice. Every once in a while, they come on over and visit the team. They got Will Rogers at quarterback, 40 starts under his belt, coming in from the late Mike Leach's offense at Mississippi State. So he should be able to throw the ball. So they should be able to run the ball, should be able to throw the ball. And I know their next crop of offensive linemen are pretty big. It's kind of like the Michigan story. Very familiar with that. A whole bunch of new players, but some bigger guys ready to step up and make their mark. We'll figure it out where this Washington football team is going to be this year. But make no mistake about it, it is a total reboot with the Huskies. So we'll try and figure this thing out as well. And I keep saying that because Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of next week, we're going to grab each one of these new teams and focus solely on them. Right now, just kind of a thumbnail welcome to the Big Ten, if you will. So that leaves us with the USC Trojans, and they might make a little noise in their first year in the Big Ten. How much remains to be seen. Lincoln Riley is known for his high-flying, high-scoring offenses. In fact, he typically hasn't paid much attention to defense in the past. His plan was just to outscore people, but we're not so sure that that's going to work in the Big Ten, so he's got to shore up the defense. Now, he did steal Danton Lynn, the defense coordinator from the UCLA Bruins across town. He's now with USC. That'll be a big help. That's a good get on his coaching staff. Offensively, of course, we all know the story of Miller Moss by now, who lit up the Holiday Bowl in his one and only college start with 6 touchdown passes, stepping in for Caleb Williams as Williams was getting ready to be the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. Now, the Trojans do have a brutal schedule this year. It includes LSU to open it up. They got Michigan. They got Penn State. They got Nebraska. They got Notre Dame, the traditional Notre Dame game. That's going to be a pretty tough one as well. And also, let's welcome UCLA. This is a program that's in flux a little bit. Head coach Chip Kelly left suddenly to become Ryan Day's offensive coordinator at Ohio State. So Deshaun Foster, an alum, steps in, his first head coaching gig. And interesting, hired offensive coordinator with Eric Bieniemy, right, of the NFL. So this might be the most intriguing offensive coordinator in all of college football. In fact, I want to take a few minutes in our next segment. So hang around for that to talk about that and how he's implementing his system at UCLA and how it's going. It is pretty complicated. So we'll do that in our next segment. I want to look at that. But Foster said he's got great support. Everything he's seen has been great. The minute he was named head coach, he's had only 3 kids transfer out. So the players were excited that he got the job, and he's excited to be coaching at his alma mater and excited to jump to the Big Ten. So they're scheduled, no Michigan, no Ohio State. They do have LSU, like USC does. Oregon and Penn State are on the schedule. So not easy by any stretch.
Game Time makes getting to the ballpark even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section or row for less, section and row for less. Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the free app and new users can get $20 off their first purchase with code Locked On. Terms apply. That's code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, the lowest price guaranteed.
Fantasy football drafts are on the horizon. We pick the quarterbacks who we would put on the Olympic podium.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So it is so important, right, to find good values throughout the draft. That's how you win your leagues. Yes, obviously you have to do waivers and pay attention and make the correct moves. But when you can find those good values in the middle of your drafts or later on in your drafts, that is how you can really make the difference for your team. And with the Olympics going on, we just kind of wanted to have some fun here, right? So we're going to give 3 quarterbacks. We'll each have 3 different guys, kind of give them their gold medal, silver medal, bronze medal of the best values in the draft. So starting off with the gold medal, who is the number 1 best quarterback value in fantasy drafts this offseason, Vinny?
Well, I'm excited to reveal them also because our 2 quarterbacks have a kind of interesting connection. We'll get into that once Michelle gives her pick, but my pick is easy. It's Jaden Daniels. I know there's a lot of buzz around Anthony Richardson from last year, similar type talent, big arm, can run a lot. And then we have this year in the same draft class, number 1 overall, Caleb Williams. He's also being hyped a lot as being a potential QB1 with a lot of upside. Well, Jaden Daniels is going as a QB1. He's QB 12 on the board. He's gone up a little bit. People have kind of settled in with him in the top 12, but still in drafts, he's going a little later, 7th, 8th round. So he's going a little lower than his expert ranking would suggest. And look, this is a good place to target quarterbacks this year. It's right at the bottom, 12 to 15. This is where you're going to get your best values. If you're in a 1 quarterback, non-super flex league, this is where you're going to target your number 1 starter quite a bit. I think you could go a little earlier and get some great return on investment as well. But Jaden Daniels, you look at him, I mean, there's a lot of things to like. Kyler Murray was a very good quarterback 1 in terms of average scoring, finished number 9 with Cliff Kingsbury as a rookie in 2019 as the number 1 overall pick. So this offense is very conducive to Jaden Daniels. They're going to cater it to his running. And he's got great weapons. I mean, we'll see about Jahan Dotson emerging, but Terry McLaurin is a very good number 1 to have. They've got some depth at tight end with Zach Ertz and the rookie Ben Sennett. They've got Austin Eckler, very good pass catching back on top of Brian Robinson, who's pretty good. They've upgraded their offensive line. And we know Daniels can take off and run in this offense. So everything kind of lines up with Daniels' skill set to be with the Cliff Kingsbury offense. And we know it was instant results there with Murray. And I think Daniels is a little bit more dynamic as a passer earlier in his career than Murray was. I think Murray was pretty good, and he ran around and made a lot of plays, but a lot of his value is based on running. I think Jaden Daniels could be a little bit more complete in terms of giving us numbers both ways that we're looking for. So look at it. Running quarterback, we know that's a cheat code, but I know you're thinking similarly with your pick and related a little bit to what Jaden Daniels can do.
Yeah, I knew you'd want Jaden Daniels to be the gold medal winner here. So I totally agree with you. I mean, he's one of the best values in drafts. Obviously, it's risky, right? As a rookie, it's always going to be risky. Playing on the Commanders, too, it's like we haven't had a lot of faith in them. But with his rushing ability, it just feels like it's a pretty easy smash pick that late in drafts. Now, my guy's Kyler Murray, and I feel better about taking him, right? But he is going a little bit earlier than Jaden Daniels. He's going late 6th round, early 7th round. So if I miss out on Kyler Murray, then I'd go to Jaden Daniels. But I mean, Murray's just going so late because I guess people are still scared from the ACL tear. But last year, he was coming back in the middle of the season. His only weapon was tight end Trey McBride. I mean, he did not have good weapons out there at all. And you just weren't expecting much in a brand new system. But going back to when he was healthy in 2022, prior to him getting injured, he was well on his way to being a top 5 fantasy quarterback just 2 seasons ago, averaging over 20 points per game prior to tearing his ACL. In 2021, he was quarterback 4 in points per game. In 2020, he was quarterback 5. And now he's going as quarterback 8 You can get him at such a nice deal because people are scared off this. And then they add Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, that is so huge. I think instantly he's going to make a huge impact. Michael Wilson, who had a somewhat solid rookie season coming into a second season. You have Trey McBride, who broke out last year. Now, hopefully, can be good the whole year. They added a good deep threat in Zay Jones. Like, and also the Cardinals should have an absolutely terrible defense still. Like, they did do a lot of things to fix up their offense, and we're excited for that. But the defense, I mean, it's on paper, it still looks like it's going to be one of the worst. So that means this offense is going to have to be putting up a lot of points. A lot of points is going to be good. And Kyler Murray should start running a lot more too, because again, like there's no reason for him not to be fully healed at this point, this far removed from the injury. I'm all in. There's no reason that CJ Stroud is going 45th overall while Kyler Murray is going 30 picks after that. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I think he's the value that you're looking for in relation to CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson. Like, if you're going early for a quarterback, he's the value there. Now, I look at my choice, Jane Daniels. He's maybe the guy that you're looking at instead of Caleb Williams. Maybe if you don't want to jump into Dak Prescott or Jordan Love and you don't want to go in that direction, you can get a pretty good value behind them. So the funny thing is both these guys could probably win the 100-meter dash of quarterbacks in the NFL. They're both really fast. And we know that's a really special attribute that, again, is going to always pad your fantasy stats. It's going to happen. And you don't need a lot. You can really make up for a lot of it. And Murray, I mean, I have one minor concern. Will he get too egotistical a little bit and say, I'm going to be a pocket passer, or I'm going to not run and take off? But I don't think he has a choice. I think it's a little bit of the design of the offense where take off and run. It's part of your skill set. It's important. I mean, I look at Lamar Jackson. He's found a way to mesh those two parts of the game really well, where he can get the rushing yards, but also make the big plays when needed, put up the big fantasy numbers when we're looking at it. So it can be done. We see with Josh Allen every single year. And so Kyler Murray, use your legs. That's when you're a big-time fantasy asset, scoring right up there with Josh Allen a few years ago. So I'm excited for these two guys running around again. Cliff Kingsbury is the link between Murray's past and Daniel's future. And I think that's going to really be nice here for the production on both sides. So again, two undervalues there, a QB8 and a QB12. We're going to watch very carefully.
Yeah, it's just nice when you can get those guys later on when, the Strouds and the Burrows and Prescott and even Love, like going ahead of both of them, and they're not big runners, right? So they have to throw so many touchdowns for them to come through at their cost. Well, Murray and Daniels, like, you're not depending on the passing touchdowns. You're going to get so many points from the rushing alone that the passing touchdowns are just a cherry on top. And those are the guys I'd like to take later on to be my starting quarterback, and you can get them later in the draft.